My name is Lauren Hartwell. I'm 31 years old. 2 weeks ago, my sister Caroline looked my fiancé straight in the eyes and said, "She's only marrying you for your money, Aaron." My mother didn't interrupt her. She simply smiled. It was the exact same smile she wore 9 years ago. The morning she quietly buried the future I had worked my entire life to build. Then she added one more sentence. "Ask her about the man she's been hiding." I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I didn't even put my coffee down. I just stood there in my own kitchen, holding the mug with both hands, while the two women who were supposed to protect me tried to destroy the happiest thing that had ever happened to me. What they didn't know was this. Aaron had already been collecting the truth for 4 months. They didn't know the man they were trying to use against me had been waiting 9 years for someone to ask him one simple question. They thought they were ending our wedding. Instead, they woke up 9 years of silence. But that isn't where this story begins. The kitchen was only the ending. The real beginning happened 9 years earlier, when my mother decided I wasn't allowed to have a future that didn't belong to her. Today I own an interior design studio in Nashville called Hartwell Interiors. 6 employees, a bright corner office in the Gulch, projects across Tennessee and Georgia. Last year we generated just over $1.2 million in revenue. My family doesn't know that. As far as my mother is concerned, I still do a little freelance decorating. That misunderstanding isn't an accident. For 9 years, I've carefully controlled exactly how much my mother and my sister know about my life. Almost nothing. Peace, I've learned, survives only when it has boundaries. I met Aaron Castellan at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. Every woman in the room noticed his tailored navy suit. I noticed that he'd spent nearly 10 minutes studying an antique Persian rug in the lobby. When we happened to stand beside each other, he didn't ask my name. Instead, he pointed toward the rug. "What do you think?" he asked. "Original or reproduction?" I smiled. "The foundation is modern, but the pattern follows 19th century Caucasian weaving." He looked at me for a second. Then he smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." We spent the next hour talking about architecture, fabrics, old buildings, books, and cities we'd never visited. By the time the fundraiser ended, neither of us remembered to finish our champagne. A month later, I learned his consulting firm had helped 2 of my biggest clients expand their businesses. The world suddenly felt very small. 18 months later, he proposed. A rented cabin in Asheville, rain tapping softly against the porch roof, a small velvet box. He barely managed to finish the question before I said yes. I cried. Then I laughed. Then I cried again. Aaron laughed with me. "I've never seen anyone cry and smile at the same time," he said. "I didn't know it was possible." I didn't either. We waited almost 2 weeks before telling my mother. Some naive part of me believed people softened with age. That enough time had passed. That maybe, just maybe, she had changed. I was wrong. When I told her I was engaged, she paused for only a second before saying, "Well, he's certainly a wonderful catch." "Nah, I'm happy for you." "Nah, tell me everything." "Nah, when can I meet him?" A catch. Like Aaron wasn't the man I loved. Like he was simply the most valuable prize someone had managed to pull from the lake before anyone else could. I ignored it. I'd spent 9 years learning which comments were worth answering. That one wasn't. Our wedding was scheduled for the 2nd of May. 46 guests, a small Episcopal church. The rehearsal dinner would take place the Friday before at the Hermitage Hotel. By early April, almost everything was finished. Flowers paid, menu finalized, music confirmed. Even the seating chart had already been completed. That's when my mother called. "Honey," she said sweetly. "Caroline and I were thinking we'd come over Wednesday morning and help you finish the seating. Arrangements." I looked down at my iPad. There was nothing left to finish. She knew that. I knew that. Still, that would be lovely, Mom. After we hung up, I didn't call Aaron. I simply texted him 3 words. "They're coming Wednesday." Less than 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Ready?" Just 1 word. "Ready." If someone else had read those messages, they would have thought we were talking about a normal family visit. We weren't, because Aaron and I both knew something wasn't right. My mother had been unusually pleasant for almost a year. Too pleasant. She never criticized my business, never questioned my engagement, never commented on my independence. She smiled. She complimented. She behaved. People don't change that dramatically overnight. Not without a reason. Aaron sensed it too. Neither of us knew exactly what she was planning. We only knew she was waiting. To understand why that Wednesday morning mattered, you have to go back to May of 2017. I was 22 years old, fresh out of the University of Tennessee, with a degree in interior design. I hadn't slept properly in nearly 3 weeks because I was waiting for one letter. It arrived on May 18th. Heavy cream paper, embossed letterhead, Marlowe & Voss Design Group, New York City, a paid summer internship, 3 months. Housing provided, $2,800 a month. The signature at the bottom belonged to Theodore Marlowe, the firm's creative director. I called immediately to accept. He asked about my portfolio. He asked why I'd chosen a muted green palette for the restaurant project on page 17. He asked whether I'd read a particular Italian architect's book. I told him I had. Then I admitted I disagreed with chapter 4. He laughed. There was a long pause. Then he said, "I'll see you on June 12th, Miss Hartwell." I hung up the phone and cried, not because I was afraid, because every dream I'd carried since high school suddenly felt possible. The first person I called was my father. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I always knew you'd make it." The second person I called was my mother. She asked unusually specific questions. The firm's address, the office number, the creative director's full name. She wrote everything down. At the time, I thought she was simply interested. Now I know better. She wasn't gathering information. She was gathering ammunition. That summer, I was dating a children's book illustrator named Bryce Whitlock. Kind, patient, funny, the sort of man who drew confused little dogs and smiling frogs for a living. He planned to move to New York with me. His sister lived in Brooklyn and had already offered us a place to stay during the first week. When I told my mother about Bryce, something in her expression changed. She didn't yell. She never yelled. Instead, 3 days later, I found a printed article lying on the kitchen counter. It was about the divorce rate among creative professionals. She left it there. I left it there. Neither of us touched it. That was how my mother fought. Quietly, indirectly. She planted ideas and waited for them to grow. 2 days before my flight to New York, she knocked on my bedroom door at 7 in the morning. She carried a cup of coffee and an envelope. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." She placed the envelope on my bed. Inside was another letter from Marlowe & Voss. Same cream paper, same logo, same signature. It stated that, due to internal restructuring, my internship had been officially withdrawn. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Nothing made sense. I called them this morning. My mother said gently, "I wanted to ask about parking." She rubbed my back while I stared at the page. They told me the internship program had changed. I asked them to send something in writing so you'd have closure. Closure. Such a gentle word. I believed every syllable. Bryce begged me to call the firm myself. "Lauren, just call them. Please. There has to be some mistake." But I looked down at the letter. It seemed so official, so final. What would I even ask? I whispered. "They've already made their decision." I never made the call. 2 days later, the plane left for New York without me. And for the next 9 years, I believed my dream had simply slipped away. I had no idea that the letter in my hands had never come from New York at all. For almost 2 years after I missed that internship, I convinced myself that life simply hadn't gone the way I'd hoped. I blamed bad timing, bad luck, my own inexperience. I never blamed my mother. Why would I? She had cried with me that morning. She had held my hand while I watched my dream disappear. At least, that's what I believed. I left Knoxville in November of 2017. I packed 2 suitcases, a folding drafting table, my laptop, and $1,200 I'd saved from college jobs. I rented a tiny studio apartment in East Nashville, $750 a month. The bathroom was so small I could brush my teeth while sitting on the toilet. The heater made a rattling sound every night. The refrigerator leaked. I loved every inch of that apartment. Because every inch belonged to me, money disappeared faster than I expected. During the evenings, I waited tables at the pharmacy burger parlor. 6 nights a week, 4 in the afternoon until 11 at night. During the mornings, I studied interior design software, commercial drafting, lighting certification, building codes. Everything I thought New York would have taught me, I tried teaching myself, slowly, piece by piece. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk. Other nights, I cried because I was so tired that my hand shook while drawing straight lines. Still, I kept going. My father rarely called, but every Christmas a package arrived. Always one book, always wrapped in brown paper. Inside the cover, 2 handwritten words. Just because. Nothing else. No letter, no explanation, no apology. Only those 2 words. I kept every book, I still have them. In 2019, my parents divorced. The news surprised almost everyone. It didn't surprise me. Some marriages don't explode. They simply stop breathing. Dad rented a small house outside Knoxville. A week later, I noticed $200 had appeared in my Venmo account. The memo read exactly what every Christmas card had always said. Just because. He sent that payment every month for a year and a half. He never mentioned it. Neither did I. Years later, part of that money became the security deposit on my very first design studio. I've never told him. Work slowly began finding me. One nursery, then a kitchen, then an office lobby. Clients recommended me to friends. Friends recommended me to neighbors. One project became 3. 3 became 12. In the spring of 2023, I finally opened my own business, Hartwell Interiors. The first thing I hung inside the studio wasn't an award. It wasn't a diploma. It wasn't even one of my designs. It was a photograph. Me, 4 years old, sitting on a sidewalk with a box of colored chalk. My mother had taken that picture. Ironically, it became the only photograph from my childhood I ever displayed. By then, I barely spoke to my mother anymore. Every Christmas I mailed her a card, usually with a picture of my cat. Every Christmas. She mailed one back. No note, no message, nothing. At some point I stopped expecting anything different. Silence became normal. And strangely, normal became peaceful. Then, everything changed because of one email. It arrived in December of 2024. Unknown sender. A Proton Mail address I'd never seen before. The subject line contained only 4 words. About 2017, read carefully. No greeting, no explanation. Only a single PDF attachment. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. It was an employee roster from Marlowe & Voss Design Group. Summer Internship Program, June 2017. Names, employee badge photos, rows and rows of interns. Then, my eyes stopped. 3rd row, 5th column, Lauren Hartwell. That was my name. But the face beside it wasn't mine. It was Caroline. My sister, wearing cheap reading glasses she'd never owned. My heart started pounding. I zoomed in, then zoomed in again. It was definitely Caroline. I closed the laptop so quickly it almost snapped shut. I didn't look at the email again. Not for 8 months. People imagine the truth sets you free. Sometimes, the truth terrifies you, because if it is real, everything you've built your life around suddenly becomes a lie. For 8 months, I convinced myself the roster had been fake, a coincidence, photoshopped, anything, everything. I wasn't ready to know. Then, one Tuesday morning in August, my receptionist knocked on my office door. Lauren, there's a woman from Atlanta online too. She says she's verifying employment history. I picked up. Lauren Hartwell speaking. The woman introduced herself as Cassidy Riley. She worked in senior recruitment for a branding company. She sounded professional. Calm. Methodical. I apologize if this sounds unusual, she said. We're conducting a background verification on one of our finalists. I waited. The applicant is Caroline Hartwell Boone. My stomach tightened. She claims she completed an internship at Marlowe and Voss Design Group during the summer of 2017. Another pause. When we contacted the firm, they informed us that the internship belonged to someone named Lauren Hartwell. I didn't breathe. The applicant explained that Lauren Hartwell was a professional, nickname shared between sisters. Silence. Then Cassidy asked the question that changed my life. Can you confirm that? I answered without thinking. No. A pause, longer this time. I've never worked for Marlowe & Voss. I've never lived in Manhattan. I've never shared a portfolio with my sister. And I've never allowed anyone to use my name professionally. Cassidy became very quiet. I appreciate your honesty, Miss Hartwell. I'll need to follow up internally. She ended the call. I sat motionless for nearly 40 minutes. Then, I opened the old email, the one I'd spent 8 months pretending didn't exist. I enlarged Caroline's badge photograph. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before, a tiny ink smudge near the bottom corner of the badge, almost like a thumbprint. I walked to the storage cabinet inside my office, pulled out an old archival box I'd carried through 3 apartments and 2 office moves. Inside, still perfectly preserved, lay the original internship offer, and beside it, the rescission letter my mother had handed me 9 years earlier. I placed both documents side by side, turned on my phone flashlight, studied every detail. The company logo wasn't the same size. The fonts were slightly different. The spacing between the paragraphs was inconsistent. Even the date format was wrong. Every legitimate Marlowe & Voss document used slashes. The rescission letter used periods. Tiny differences. The sort of mistakes only someone copying a business letter from memory would make. My mother hadn't received that letter. She had created it. I didn't cry. Not yet. I simply sat there until the sun disappeared, behind the buildings outside my studio. I watched the room slowly grow darker. I didn't call Aaron. I didn't call my father. I didn't call anyone. Some truths need room before they're spoken aloud. For 5 days, I told no one, because there was one man I needed to find before anyone else. The man whose signature appeared at the bottom of both letters. The man who had unknowingly become part of my family's greatest lie. His name was Theodore Marlowe. And after 9 years, I was finally ready to ask him what really happened. Found Theodore Marlowe on LinkedIn during the 3rd week of November. He had left Marlowe & Voss in 2020. Now he owned a small design advisory firm in Tribeca called Marlowe Advisory. His profile photo showed exactly the kind of man I remembered from our one phone call 9 years earlier. Gray cardigan, wireframe glasses, calm eyes that looked as though they noticed everything. I stared at the screen for nearly an hour before I sent him a message. It contained only 3 sentences. Mr. Marlowe, my name is Lauren Hartwell. In June of 2017, your firm offered me a summer internship that was later withdrawn. I've recently learned someone may have impersonated me. If you're willing, I'd appreciate 15 minutes of your time. I expected to wait days, maybe weeks. He replied 19 minutes later. Miss Hartwell, I've been waiting 9 years for this message. I read that sentence 3 times. I've been waiting 9 years. How could someone I'd never met be waiting for me? I booked a flight to New York the same evening. Aaron offered to come. I told him no. Not because I wanted to be alone, but because I needed to hear the truth before anyone else did. This wasn't our story yet. It was still mine. The following Thursday, I landed at LaGuardia just after 8:30 in the morning. The taxi crossed into Manhattan beneath a gray December sky. The city looked exactly as I had imagined it at 22. Only now, I was arriving 9 years late. As we crossed Canal Street, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. I was terrified, because if Theodore confirmed what I suspected, then my entire adult life had been built on a lie. Marlowe Advisory occupied the 12th floor of a quiet building in Tribeca. Oak floors, white walls, fresh flowers at reception. A woman with silver hair looked up as I stepped inside. You must be Miss Hartwell. She smiled gently. He's been expecting you. Theodore Marlowe stood as I entered his office. He looked older than his profile picture. But only older. Not weaker, not slower. His eyes were exactly the same. He didn't shake my hand immediately. Instead, he looked carefully at my face, then opened a file that had already been waiting on his desk. Finally, he asked, "Did you happen to bring your original internship offer?" I nodded. I'd carried it inside my handbag all morning. He placed my letter beside another document from his own file. Then he switched on a small brass desk lamp and studied both pages. 8, maybe 10. Silent seconds passed. Finally, he leaned back, then quietly said, "You're the real Lauren." Those 5 words changed something inside me, not because I doubted who I was, but because someone else had known all along that something wasn't right. He folded his hands. I've carried questions about that summer for a very long time. He opened the black binder in front of him. The young woman who arrived in June wasn't the person I interviewed over the phone. I didn't interrupt. During your interview, he continued, you spoke passionately about color theory. You challenged an entire chapter of an architecture book. You described details from your portfolio without hesitation. He looked at me. The woman who arrived couldn't answer any of those questions. He removed an employee badge from a protective sleeve. The badge carried my name, Lauren Hartwell. The photograph belonged to Caroline. My throat tightened. We questioned her privately. She insisted she was you. She had identification. She had paperwork. She had your portfolio. We had no evidence to prove otherwise. I whispered. So you believed her? He nodded slowly. We made the wrong decision. He turned another page. Performance reviews, attendance reports, supervisor notes, everything carefully preserved. Then he stopped at one document. Termination notice. October 2017. Reason. Plagiarism. I terminated her personally. His voice carried genuine regret. She submitted another designer's work as her own. I knew then that something about the entire situation had been wrong. He reached for another plastic sleeve. Inside were 2 typed transcripts. We called your home. Twice. The week after the internship started. My heart stopped. I never got those calls. I know. We left 2 voicemail messages asking you to contact us. We never heard back. My hand slowly tightened around the edge of the chair. My mother controlled our home phone. Theodore's expression changed, almost imperceptibly. Understanding. I tried one last time. He pulled out an unopened envelope. The address was mine, Knoxville, October 2017. I mailed you this after Caroline was dismissed. It came back unopened. Across the front was a postal stamp. Undeliverable. Return to sender. I assumed I'd somehow misunderstood everything. I convinced myself I was imagining problems that weren't there. He looked directly at me. I've regretted that assumption for 9 years. I finally opened the binder. Inside was everything. Caroline's employee badge, her forged intake forms, daily attendance sheets, performance evaluations, the plagiarism investigation, internal emails, copies of the voicemail transcripts, every single document, neatly organized, carefully preserved. 9 years. He'd kept all of it. Then he said something I'll never forget. Miss Hartwell, I've interviewed thousands of young designers. You were one of maybe 5 whose work I genuinely remembered. You belonged in New York. I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't want to. Because after 9 years, those words hurt more than anything else I'd heard that day. He stood and walked toward the window. I need you to understand something. If I had known that someone had stolen your identity, I would have gone to the police myself. I believed him. For the first time since opening that fake rescission letter, I believed someone. Before I left, he handed me a duplicate copy of every document in the binder. I've already scanned everything. Take these. If you ever need me. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I cried for the first time inside the elevator. Not loudly, not dramatically, just one silent tear after another as 12 floors slowly disappeared beneath me. Outside, Manhattan looked exactly the same. Thousands of people hurried past without noticing me. 9 years earlier, this city had represented everything I'd lost. Now, it represented proof. Proof that I had never failed. Proof that I had never broken down. Proof that someone else had stolen the life I'd worked for. Instead of going straight to the airport, I made one phone call. The first phone call to my father in almost 9 years. He answered on the second ring. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he whispered, "Lauren." I closed my eyes. "Dad," before I could say another word. I heard him begin to cry, quietly, like a man who'd been carrying something far too heavy for far too long. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I leaned against a brick wall outside Theodore's office building. "I know what happened." Silence. Then, "I'll come. Whenever you need me. No questions. No excuses. I'll come." I thanked him. We ended the call. It took me 3 more days before I told Aaron. Not because I doubted him. Because I needed to hold the truth in my own hands before I shared it with the man I loved. When he arrived at my apartment that Monday evening, the black binder was already waiting on the coffee table. He sat down without asking a single question. I took a deep breath, and for the next 15 minutes, I told him everything. When I finished telling Aaron everything, the apartment fell completely silent. He didn't interrupt me once. Not during the story, not after it. He simply looked down at the binder resting on the coffee table between us. Then he opened it. He didn't skim. He read every page, the forged rescission letter, Caroline's employee badge, the plagiarism report, the transcripts of the unanswered voicemails, the returned envelope Theodore had tried to send me. When he reached the final page, he quietly closed the binder. Then he looked at me. "You never had a breakdown." It wasn't really a question, no. "You never lost that internship." "No, you were robbed." I nodded. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Aaron reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and turned the screen toward me. At the top of the page, I read 4 words. Lauren at Thanksgiving Notes. There were dozens of bullet points underneath. Every contradiction, every lie, every inconsistency my mother and Caroline had told during Thanksgiving dinner at Aaron's parents' house. He had written every single one down. "You've been doing this?" He smiled. "Since November. You never told me. You were finding the truth. I figured my job was making sure nobody rewrote it again." I looked at him, really looked at him. Not once had he demanded proof. Not once had he asked whether I was exaggerating. He had simply believed me. And quietly started verifying everything himself. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just marrying a good man. I was marrying the safest place I had ever known. Over the next 4 months, we prepared, not for a wedding, for a reckoning. Quietly, patiently, carefully. The binder stayed in my office. Aaron started keeping one of his own. Whenever my mother or Caroline said something suspicious, he wrote it down. Dates, times, exact wording. People who lie, he once told me, always forget their own script. In early March, my mother suddenly became unusually interested in the wedding. She hired a wedding consultant without asking me. The consultant somehow knew details I had never shared. Guest counts, flower orders, reception schedule. Aaron and I exchanged a glance every time another strange email arrived. Someone was feeding my mother information, so we simply let them, sometimes the easiest. Way to discover who's spying is to quietly change what they see. A week later, Caroline accidentally ran into Aaron at a restaurant in Germantown. She sat down without being invited, spent almost 40 minutes talking. Lauren had always been emotionally fragile. Lauren struggled after college. Lauren never really recovered from 2017. Aaron listened. He smiled politely, paid his bill, came home. When he finished telling me the conversation, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. They're testing the story, I said. Aaron nodded. They don't know the story has witnesses now. Another week passed. Then Aaron's mother received an anonymous letter. No return address. Plain white envelope. One sentence. Before your son marries Lauren, ask her about the man she's been seeing in Manhattan. Helen Castellan called Aaron immediately. I burned it, she said. I just wanted you to know. She never called me. She never asked for an explanation. She trusted me completely. After Aaron told me about the letter, I locked myself in my studio bathroom and cried, not because someone had tried to destroy me again, because for the first time in my life, an older woman had chosen trust instead of suspicion. I didn't know how much I needed that until I had it. By late March, my mother insisted on coming over for brunch. She brought lilies. Caroline brought pastries. We sat around my kitchen island eating bagels and smoked salmon while pretending everything was normal. Caroline wandered around my apartment studying every photograph, every piece of furniture, every decoration. She stopped in front of a framed picture of Aaron and me taken the night he proposed. She smiled. You always land on your feet. Something about the sentence felt wrong, like admiration wrapped around resentment. Then my mother noticed the seating chart on my iPad. She stared at it. Aaron's parents are sitting at table 1. Yes. And I'm at table 4? I nodded. They're hosting the rehearsal dinner. For just a fraction of a second, I saw the same look pass between my mother and Caroline that I'd seen 9 years earlier. A silent conversation. No words, only understanding. I knew exactly what it meant now. Someone had just made a decision. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Theodore. He was confirming his flight to Nashville. I stepped into the hallway. Friday, 6 o'clock. Hermitage Hotel? Perfect, he said. I'll see you then. When I returned, my phone was exactly where I'd left it. Face down. But something was different. The angle had shifted slightly. Tiny, almost impossible to notice, unless you were someone who spent her life arranging objects for a living. Caroline came back from the hallway moments later. She'd supposedly gone to wash her hands. The bathroom wasn't even in that direction. She smiled too brightly. Everything suddenly made sense. She had read my messages. Good. I wanted her to. The moment they drove away, I called Aaron. She saw Theodore's text. His answer came immediately. Perfect. Nothing more. Perfect. 3 days later, Caroline texted my mother. Aaron later obtained the screenshots. He's older, a guy named Theodore. We have until Friday. My mother's reply was only 4 words. Then we move now. That was when we knew. Whatever they were planning, they weren't waiting for the rehearsal dinner anymore. They were coming to our home. Tuesday evening, my mother called. Honey, can Caroline and I stop by tomorrow morning? We really need to talk. I looked across the room. Aaron was already watching me. I smiled. Of course. 8 o'clock. After hanging up, I sent Aaron exactly 3 words. They're coming tomorrow. His reply arrived almost instantly. Ready. Wednesday morning. 7:57 a.m. The doorbell rang. My mother wore a navy silk blouse. Caroline carried an overnight bag. In case we stay and help, she said. I hadn't invited them to stay. Aaron had been in the guest room since 6:30 that morning. Hidden, waiting. Not because he wanted to eavesdrop. Because we'd already agreed. If they came to destroy our relationship, they deserved to do it in front of both of us. 3 coffees sat on the kitchen island. I'd poured them 10 minutes earlier. They were already growing cold. We talked about flowers, guest lists, the weather, anything except why they were really there. Exactly 8 minutes passed. Then Aaron walked into the kitchen. My mother's smile flickered. Only for a heartbeat. She recovered quickly. Aaron! I didn't realize you'd be here. Good morning, Patricia. He poured himself a cup of coffee, leaning casually against the counter beside me. Caroline waited almost 30 seconds before speaking. Then she turned toward him. Soft voice, gentle smile, practiced concern. Aaron, can I tell you something, woman to man? He nodded politely. She took a breath. Lauren is only marrying you because of your money. Silence. My mother placed her coffee cup down, then added quietly, and while we're being honest, ask her about the older man she's been hiding. I didn't defend myself, didn't even move. Aaron looked at me. Only me. Would you like to answer that? No. I'd like them to leave. My mother's expression hardened. Lauren, don't be ridiculous. This concerns Aaron. He deserves to know the truth. Aaron calmly reached beneath the kitchen counter, lifted a plain brown grocery bag, pulled out a sealed manila envelope, placed it carefully between all 4 of us. Neither my mother nor Caroline had ever seen it before. What is that? Caroline whispered. Aaron rested one hand on the envelope. There is something inside this. He looked directly at my mother. It answers every question you've asked this morning. She stared at it. What is it? Aaron smiled. You'll find out Friday night. At the rehearsal dinner. In front of everyone. The color drained from Caroline's face. Lauren, you don't have to do this. For the first time that morning, I spoke directly to my sister. Take your bag. Get in the car. Nobody moved. Aaron spoke again. Please leave. We'll continue this conversation Friday. My mother looked from me to Aaron, to the sealed envelope. For the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. Not because she knew what was inside. Because she realized she no longer controlled the story. Without another word, she picked up her purse. Caroline grabbed her overnight bag. At exactly 8:42 a.m., they walked out of our apartment. The front door clicked shut. Neither Aaron nor I spoke. He picked up every untouched cup of coffee, poured them into the sink, then brewed a fresh pot. We sat together at the kitchen island in complete silence. Finally, I whispered, they're going to spend the next 9 days lying about what happened in this room. Aaron wrapped his hand around mine. Let them. He looked toward the kitchen drawer where the sealed envelope now rested. Friday. The truth gets its turn. Friday, April 24th. The Hermitage Hotel. 6 o'clock. 38 guests. A jazz pianist named Curtis Vale played softly in the corner while waiters moved quietly between tables, carrying glasses of champagne. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Everyone smiled. Everyone laughed. No one except 4 people knew the evening wasn't really a rehearsal dinner. It was the end of a lie. I wore an emerald silk dress. Aaron wore a navy suit. My father drove in from Knoxville that afternoon. He arrived at exactly 5:45. When I walked outside to meet him, he stood beside his car for a moment before saying anything. He looked older than the last time I'd hugged him. Smaller somehow. He opened his arms. I'm sorry, he whispered. I was 9 years late. I hugged him tightly. You're here now. That's enough. He cried quietly against my shoulder. Then we walked into the hotel together. Helen Castellan greeted him before I even had the chance. She held both of his hands. I'm very happy you're here, Edward. She'd already ordered his favorite bourbon. I hadn't told her what it was. Aaron had. She'd remembered. My father smiled for the first time that day. At 6:15, Theodore Marlowe arrived, gray cardigan replaced by a charcoal suit, still carrying the same black leather binder. I'd introduced him to everyone as an old family friend from New York. Everyone, including my mother. When Theodore reached her, he offered his hand. She smiled politely. Patricia Hartwell. I know. He shook her hand. I believe we've spoken before. She frowned slightly. I'm sorry. I don't think so. He held her gaze. Summer of 2017. For one brief second, every bit of color disappeared from her face. Then she smiled again. I'm afraid I don't remember. Theodore nodded calmly. I do. Then he walked away. Caroline watched the entire exchange. She didn't say a word, but I saw panic flicker across her face. Brendan Voss arrived a few minutes later with Aaron's father. Most guests assumed he was another business associate. Only Aaron, Theodore, and I knew why he was really there. He had been one of the partners at Marlowe and Voss. He had personally signed Caroline's termination paperwork 9 years earlier. He still remembered her. Dinner began. Conversation filled the room. Wine was poured. Plates arrived. Everything looked perfectly normal. Until the toasts. Helen stood first. She smiled toward me. To my future daughter-in-law. To the woman who built a beautiful life from absolutely nothing. To Lauren. Every glass rose. Except my mother's. She barely touched hers. Then something happened that hadn't been planned. My mother stood. No one had invited her to speak. She smiled around the room. I'd like to say just a few words before tomorrow. Silence settled over the ballroom. She looked directly at Aaron. Our Lauren has always been... She paused dramatically. A dreamer? A little fragile. We're simply grateful she's finally found someone willing to take care of her. Before anyone could respond, Caroline stood beside her. She lifted her glass. As Lauren's sister, I think Aaron deserves complete honesty. She turned toward him. She only wants you for your money. The room froze. Then she delivered the second lie. And while we're being honest, ask her about the older man she's been seeing. 36 people stopped breathing. I remained seated. I looked only at Aaron. He nodded once, then stood. Without a word, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulled out the manila envelope they'd seen in our kitchen, placed it gently on the white tablecloth, opened it, removed a single photograph. He held it toward Caroline. You mean this man? Her eyes widened. The color disappeared from her face. She couldn't answer. Aaron turned toward the room. This, he said calmly, is Theodore Marlowe. He lifted the photograph high enough for everyone to see. The former creative director of Marlowe and Voss Design Group. The man who personally offered Lauren an internship in New York. The internship, she was told, had been canceled. Aaron looked around the room. It was never canceled. Every eye shifted toward Theodore. Slowly, Theodore stood. He picked up the black binder. I've carried these records for 9 years. His voice was calm, professional. I interviewed Lauren Hartwell in 2017. The woman who arrived at our office under that name. He looked directly at Caroline. Was not Lauren. The ballroom became perfectly silent. Theodore opened the binder. He removed the employee badge. Held it up. This badge carries Lauren Hartwell's name. He turned it toward the room. The photograph belongs to Caroline Hartwell. Nobody spoke. He continued. Our firm eventually terminated Caroline for plagiarism. We retained every employment record. The signatures. The intake forms. The disciplinary reports. The termination documents. They're all here. He placed the badge on the table, then quietly added, and none of them belong to the woman sitting beside Aaron tonight. My mother suddenly stood. That was 9 years ago. Her voice cracked. Can't everyone just let it go? Before anyone else could answer, my father stood. He looked directly at her. Patricia. His voice was quiet. You've said enough. She stared at him. Then at me. Then at the room. Searching desperately for someone willing to defend her. She found no one. Walter Castellan, Aaron's uncle and a retired federal judge, placed his wine glass on the table. I believe, he said evenly, we've heard enough from everyone except Lauren. All eyes turned toward me. I stood. No notes, no prepared speech, only the truth. In 2017, I was offered my dream internship in New York. The day before I left, my mother handed me a forged rescission letter. She had called the firm pretending to be a concerned relative. She told them I'd suffered a mental breakdown. My sister traveled to New York under my name. She worked there pretending to be me. When she was fired for plagiarism, I never knew. I believed I'd lost the opportunity. For 9 years, I paused, then continued. I spent almost a decade believing I wasn't good enough. I built an entirely new life because I thought my dream had ended. I looked toward Theodore. It hadn't. My dream wasn't taken away. It was stolen. Brendan Voss stood. I'd like to confirm every word. He introduced himself to the room. I was one of the partners responsible for terminating the intern using Lauren Hartwell's identity. He looked directly at Caroline. The woman we dismissed is sitting over there. He pointed. There has never been any misunderstanding. He sat down. My mother's composure finally shattered. This family was only trying to protect you, she cried. You've always been emotionally unstable. Before I could answer, Helen Castellan slowly stood. She faced my mother. Her voice remained perfectly calm. No. She looked around the room. We've heard witnesses. We've seen documents. We've heard the truth. She paused. Then spoke the sentence my mother never expected. I think it's time for you and Caroline to leave. While there's still some dignity left. No one objected. Not one person. My mother grabbed Caroline's arm. Caroline tried to stand. Her legs gave way beneath her. A waiter quietly stepped forward to help. Neither of them looked at me. At exactly 8:42 p.m., the ballroom doors closed behind them. Exactly 1 week earlier, they had left my apartment at exactly 8:42 a.m. The symmetry wasn't planned, but somehow it felt right. No one spoke for several long seconds. Then the pianist quietly began playing Clair de Lune. Softly, almost like the room itself needed permission to breathe again, Walter lifted his glass. To Lauren. Every guest followed. 36 glasses rose together. No hesitation. No pity. Only respect. Helen walked over and rested her hand on my shoulder. She smiled through tears. My dear, do you understand something now? I looked at her. You've been home for a long time. You just didn't know it yet. That was when I cried. Only one tear. But after holding 9 years inside, one tear was enough. 8 days later, I married Aaron. The ceremony was simple, beautiful. My father walked me down the aisle. Theodore Marlowe gave one of the readings. Aaron's vows were short, only 5 sentences. I'll never forget the last one. I will never ask you to choose between being yourself and being loved. 2 chairs remained empty. One belonged to my late grandmother. A single white iris rested there. The other belonged to my mother. She was never invited. Neither was Caroline. The weeks afterward unfolded quietly. Caroline lost the executive position she'd been pursuing when the company verified the fraud surrounding her resume. Several consulting clients ended their contracts. She eventually sold her townhouse and moved back to Knoxville. My mother's reputation inside her church community slowly collapsed. Not because I exposed her, because the truth had. My father moved to Nashville, only 11 minutes from my studio. Theodore returned to New York. Before leaving, he visited Hartwell Interiors. He stood in front of one of my paintings for several minutes, then smiled. A few days later, I received an email from him. The subject line read, "Please tell me when your next exhibition opens." Nothing else. He didn't need to say more. I never filed a lawsuit. I never sought revenge. The truth had already done everything I needed it to do. A few weeks later, I wrote a short article on my company's website. It was about building beautiful spaces after growing up in one that never felt safe. It was shared thousands of times. People thought it was about interior design. It wasn't. It was about home. Because here's what I finally learned. A home isn't the place where people tell your story. It's the place where they finally let you tell it yourself.